No one else cares but that one person, so everybody does it for them, right? Maybe you have that kind of person in your family, right? But no matter what, family get-togethers can be kind of interesting. It can be kind of intriguing, right? Some of you are probably just like, yeah, you don't know my family. But I hope your experience has always been positive. I hope that it has. But that's not necessarily true for a lot, probably most of us, that we haven't always had positive experiences with our family. Maybe there's that like one person, maybe your cousin, who always judged you, your aunt who never liked you, your grandparent who was like super judgmental or something like that, or really selfish. There was maybe the feuding. Maybe there's that random moment where one person read into something way too much, and then 14 years later, they still don't talk, and nobody, including them, know why, right? Maybe there's that. I still remember being at a family reunion back when I was like 5 or 6, right? And this was back in Vermont. This is my dad's side of the family. And we're back at this thing, and I was young, and my cousins and my uncle were all fishing in this small little pond. And I wanted to fish too. So I went up and asked, and my uncle shut me down. He said, no. And I immediately ran back to my dad in tears. And for some reason, we have picture evidence of that right there. That's me, poor little Jesse, really sad. Do you see that? Can I just get like a whole lot of sympathy from you right now? Oh, thank you. You're healing my deep scars. Also, do you notice like the 90s shorts my dad is wearing? Anyways, sorry. You can take that away. Nobody wants to see that. So yeah, like I still remember that. And in that moment, I'm sitting there like in tears, just like, man, I wish that like my uncle wasn't part of my family. You know, this 5 or 6 year old just like, I wish my uncle wasn't part of my family because I'm just distraught. And I don't know about you, maybe you've never experienced this, but maybe you have and you're just not willing to admit it, so I'll say it for you. Maybe you've had a moment in your life where you wish you could have chosen who was in your family. Because you know the reality is that you can't. All of your mom, your dad, your grandparents, cousins, uncles, aunts, in-laws, you can't choose them. You also can't choose your kids, right? So maybe there's a point in your life where you're just like, man, I wish I could choose who was in my family. And maybe it's because you had some of those experiences. But maybe even if you didn't have that moment of like, I wish I could choose who was in my family, I can at least say this pretty confidently, okay? There's probably been moments in your life where you wish you could have chosen the characteristics of certain people, or maybe your whole family dynamic, right? Like maybe you wish your family was less outdoorsy and adventure-y and just stayed at home so you could read books in your room all day. Like maybe that was you, right? Maybe you wish that there's that one person in your family who sends you like fruit cake and weird cheeses every Christmas. And you're like, just send me the $20 this costs and I'll actually use it for something I'll actually eat, okay? If you're the one who sends the fruitcakes and the cheeses, let me just tell you something right now. Stop it. Maybe there's something you wish you could change about these people. And here's how I know, okay? Here's how I know that there are things that we would change about people in our family. Because there's one person that you get to choose to be part of your family. One. And that's your spouse. And you all know how stressful, how long, how arduous that journey is to make sure you found the right one. Because you know that if it was just like, oh, I don't really care who's in my family, you just go out and find somebody and just be like, let's get married, right? No, it's not that way. It's, do you have the same interests that I do? What's our home going to be like someday? Do you plan on raising our kids, or do you plan on working? You're sitting there thinking of everything that you can. Do you have the same ideas that same ideas of what we're going to do on holidays? You're thinking about all of these things. Because you're like, I'm not going to mess this one up. I'm stuck with all the rest of these people. I don't want to have to be stuck with you, right? I want to make sure I'm choosing the right person. There's one person you get to choose. You don't even get to choose your children, right? And of course, everyone loves their children very much. I'm not saying that you would choose your kids differently, but you still don't get to choose them, right? They just show up in your life. There's one person you get to choose, that's your spouse, and you take the effort to make sure you make the right decision. And that tells me that maybe if we had the opportunity, we might just be like, I think I would, maybe if I'm looking at the family tree, I'm just going to be like, that person over there, and maybe this person would just be completely different. And maybe you would have those moments. And all of this is really interesting, is what makes Matthew chapter 1 really interesting to me, and why I had Alexi read all of it. Because apart from all of the terrible names and all of this stuff, actually let me say this. Every Christmas, we had a tradition before we opened presents. We had one tradition. It was the worst tradition ever. And when I say it, you're going to be like, how can you say that as a pastor? Here was the terrible tradition. Before we opened the presents, we had to read through the story of Jesus. As a child, you sit down, you've waited through breakfast, you've waited through your parents being slow, you sit down to open the presents, and then they're like, let's read 4 chapters of the Bible. And you're like, I know it's about Jesus, can I open that? Like, that's all you care about. So we'd read through this, and I swear, at least once in my life, my dad just did this out of spite, or just to make me wait. He read through Matthew chapter 1. Did it. All of the names, didn't stop, didn't skip over them, all of the names. And I'm sitting there like, this is so ridiculous, right? And it's funny because when you open up Matthew, sometimes you'll tell somebody who says, hey, where can I start reading the Bible? And someone will say Matthew, and it's like, no! Start in Matthew chapter 2. Because Matthew chapter 1, if this is your first experience, you're like, what am I reading? What are these names? But I'm going to tell you something that this family tree, this genealogy of Jesus, actually has a lot more to say about him than we think it does. And here's what I mean. The first thing that we have to recognize about this genealogy is that it actually isn't complete. It's actually missing a few people. There's 14 generations from Abraham to David. And then there's 14 generations from David to when they're exiled to Babylon. The people of Israel are exiled, taken out of their land to Babylon. And then there's 14 more generations from there to Jesus. And that's not how it worked. It wasn't that perfect. There was more generations here and less generations. It wasn't exactly how it worked because the author, Matthew, isn't trying to give you an exhaustive list of all of Jesus' ancestors. That's not his goal here. What he is trying to say is that Jesus is descended from, or he's in the line of 2 very specific people. Abraham, who's like the OG, the original guy, which is actually gangsta, but the original person who God promised that he was going to do something amazing through. And then David, who was the king of Israel and at their greatest point. In essence, everybody wants to go back to when David was king. And so what Matthew is trying to say, because he's writing to Jewish people, he's trying to say that, listen, Jesus is descendant of Abraham, and he's a descendant of David, and so therefore he's rightfully our Messiah. And it's not just that, but take all these things into effect, and you see that he's our Messiah. That's the point he's trying to make. But it's still interesting, because remember I told you that he left some of the names out, and he chose some of the names to put in. So it makes it intriguing. So why did he put some in? Why did he leave some out? But even more so, it's like, okay, if Jesus is supposed to be this Messiah, this king, this line of Abraham and line of David, he's supposed to be the one. You look at his family tree, his genealogy, and you'd be like, man, there should probably be some pretty stacked people up in there, like some pretty awesome people, some people who really changed the world, did some pretty amazing things. And so when we look through it, we're going to see that, right? So why don't we start looking through? I'm just going to look at a few of the names in the genealogy of Jesus, okay? First one, Abraham. I already talked about this guy a little bit. Abraham is this guy who God promises some big things to. First, he says he's going to have a lot of descendants, right? You're going to have a lot of descendants, Abraham. And then I'm going to bless those descendants so that they can bless the entire world, right? That's what God promises to Abraham. That's a pretty amazing thing. So you would think that God, of course, God wouldn't choose the father of the people that he's going to bless the world through to be anything but this guy who's upright and moral and powerful and just an all-around good guy, right? He's not going to choose like the figurehead to be anything but those things. And Abraham is. He follows God, and he has a lot of faith. And, okay, I'm looking at my notes here. It looks like faith was the only thing Abraham had going for him. Because I guess there's a couple stories of him lying about whether his wife was actually his wife or not when he got in trouble. Oh, when his wife tells him to sleep with her servant because they don't have a child to fulfill God's promises with, so Abraham puts faith in human ability and sleeps with his wife's servant. Oh, and then after her servant has a kid, his wife gets all mad because her servant is kind of rubbing it in her face, and so she tells Abraham to kick her out and the kid out, and he does it. Okay, so maybe not the greatest start. We're going to move on. How about his grandson, Jacob? Now, this guy's kids, okay, we're back in this. Okay, this guy's kids, there's 12 of them, and that's where we get the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? So this guy's got to be a good father. He's going to be someone who's powerful and mighty. Okay, and he is. He's pretty awesome. He's actually really smart. You see some of the things that he does and how he works and all this stuff. He's a pretty smart guy. We find out he's a hard worker. He's got a decent relationship with God. He's kind of a romantic. He worked for 7 years for his wife. Like, I mean, man, how many of us can say that, guys? Right? It was like 2 weeks. Shoot. Okay, I'm looking at my notes again. Okay, so he's got an inferiority complex because he was born second, wasn't as much of a man's man as his brother. He cheated his brother out of his rightful inheritance. Oh, he has, out of those 12 sons that he has, he clearly favors 2 of them, like a good father would. And it's because they're from his favorite wife, like a good husband. Okay, never mind, that's not looking great either. Let's just skip a bunch of generations. How about that? Let's just skip the rest of those. Let's go to David, right? Because remember, I said that David is the guy. He's like Israel's guy. He was the king, and ever since he died, people are like, can we go back to having David as our king? Like, that was our moment. That was when everything was the greatest, right? Let's do that again. So obviously, he's going to be pretty awesome. So he's humble. He's a good leader. He's a good musician. He's called a man after God's own heart. He brings the nation of Israel to its most prosperous point up to that point in time. Man, like, this guy was pretty awesome. So we should keep moving on. Oh, shoot. Okay, notes again. Yeah, he was pretty good up until the point where he saw a woman bathing on a roof at night, asks about her, finds out she has a husband, but sleeps with her anyways. And then when she tells him that she's pregnant, he calls her husband back from the siege where this dude was literally fighting for David, and then tells him to go back home, to sleep with his wife to cover up this pregnancy. But this guy's too honorable to go sleep with his wife while his fellow soldiers don't have that opportunity. So David has to try and get him drunk, but even when this dude is drunk, he's too honorable to do it. So David literally has him hand-delivered a sealed note, which is his death warrant, because he's telling the general to let this guy die in battle. Okay, and even though David repents, his kids know about this, and they don't respect him, and one of his sons rapes his own half-sister. His brother finds out and takes revenge on his brother, and then he rebels against David. Okay, so we're not making much progress here. I might just have to stop the sermon. Okay, this is over, apparently. What about David's son, Solomon? Now, Solomon, I feel like we're getting to a good point here. Solomon was the guy who brought Israel to its most magnificent point ever. This is amazing. Nations around the world are looking at Israel at this time, and they're like, it's so wealthy, and Solomon is so wise. He builds the temple. He expands Israel's borders to their greatest extent. God tells him, hey, listen, I'll give you anything you ask for. And Solomon doesn't ask for power or wealth. He asks for wisdom so he can govern God's kingdom well. This is it. This guy's got it, right? I need to throw away my notes. Okay, because here we see that he grew proud over time and worked his people into the ground in order to build these amazing projects. Oh, and he let his 600 wives and 300 concubines influence him to build temples and altars to other gods, including one you sacrifice your children to. Oh, and at the end of his life, he feels hopeless and like everything is meaningless. I should probably just stop at this point. I should probably just leave because this isn't at all what I expected. Well, what about his son, Rehoboam? Oh, okay, I don't even have anything good to say about this guy. This guy is given the kingdom at his peak, and in less than a year, he tries to act like he's even more ruthless than his father, and he loses 5/6 of his kingdom in a rebellion. Sweet, okay. Can we even find a good dude? Well, then there's Jehoshaphat. There's this guy. This guy is actually worthwhile, and I don't have any. He made a bunch of reforms, brings the people back to God. He actually stays that way most of his life. So, hey, finally a good guy. Actually, I don't have any notes after this that tells me anything bad. So what about some other guys? What about Ahaz? Oh, we find out this guy burned some of his sons as an offering to an idol. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, and remember how I told you we left some people out of this? We left some people out of the genealogy? Yeah, we skipped over a good king to get to him. I don't know why we left Joash out. What about Manasseh? Oh, yeah, Manasseh also offered a few of his sons to an idol. But the difference was that this guy, there's a difference here. Later in life, he gets taken into captivity by this big empire. And while he's there, he repents and turns back to God. And when he comes back to Israel, he tries to reform it. So at least there's that. What about Zerubbabel? Zerubbabel, that's my favorite one to say. So this guy's a good guy. He was the governor of Israel after they were taken into exile in Babylon and then allowed to come back 70 years later. So he's the guy who leads one of the first groups back. Okay, and he becomes the governor of Israel at that point in time, And he tries to set everything up according to God's commands. He tries to reinstitute the temple worship and all these different things. But the people kind of just did their own thing and didn't really listen to him. So, if we recap real quick, we have a liar, a guy with an inferiority complex and who was a bad father, that's Jacob, an adulterer and a murderer, that's David, a guy who started off super well but then got obsessed with power and wealth, that's Solomon. We have a terrible leader, his son. We have a guy who was faithful, Jehoshaphat. We have at least that guy. And then we have two guys who sacrificed their kids to idols, but only one who repented for it. And then last we have a failure. Cool genealogy, Jesus. Like, I mean, seriously, you sit there and you're just like, what is this? This is crazy. And that's not to mention all of the people in there that aren't even worthy of being mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. They were just the father of this guy, so we got some, because of him, we somehow got here. That's all that they're there for, right? They're just kind of people who would be in the crowd. You wouldn't even think about them. And we've even skipped over a few names, but there's actually 5 particular ones I want to come back to real quick. 5. And they're all women. And this is really intriguing because it's weird in the first place that there's even women in this genealogy, especially in this time, because at this point in time, women are not seen as worthy of being considered to be included in this type of thing. They're not seen as very much. They're in essence mothers. They cook. That's what they do. But the men are the ones who really carry on the important stuff. And so it's weird in the first place that women are even included in this genealogy. But then second, what's weirder about this is the types of stories that these women have surrounding them, okay? And I want to look at this because this matters too. The first woman that we're going to look at is Tamar. And I don't know if you know her story. Hers is the craziest one, okay? Tamar, if you notice this, she's Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, by Tamar, meaning that she's the mother of those 2 boys, and she was, and the father was Judah. It didn't start out that way, and just to let you know how crazy this story is about to get, Judah was her father-in-law. Tamar was married to his son. Tamar's husband dies, and they don't have kids, and at this point in time, Tamar would have been, in essence, worthless. She doesn't have a man, because men could own land at the time. She doesn't have a man to, in essence, prop up her status. So she's worthless. She's used up. So what is she going to be? Well, God is a cool God, and he works through culture. And one of the things that he encourages is for families to take care of the people who don't have very much. And so one of the things that they would do in the culture is that the next brother in line would, in essence, marry this woman, his brother's wife, so that she could have children and carry on and have worth and have value. So that happens. The next brother marries her, and while he's totally cool being intimate with her, he doesn't allow the situation to progress to the point where they have kids. I'm not going to explain how that happens. It's in the Bible. You can go read it if you want. He doesn't, and it says that God was angry at him because he wasn't being just, and therefore he pretty much has a heart attack and dies. And so Tamar is left again without a husband, and Judah, her father-in-law, is like, I'm going to give you my youngest son, but he's not old enough yet. What Judah's really thinking is, in essence, 2 of my sons have died around you. No way you're getting the 3rd one. And so she goes off to live with her family while waiting for him to come of age. While she's there, she finds out that Judah has given his last son to another woman. So she's left with nothing. This isn't fair. This isn't just. She was promised that she was going to have this husband. And she's desperate. One day she finds out that Judah is going to be walking through the town that she's in. So she dresses herself up, disguises herself as a prostitute. He doesn't realize it's her. And I'm not going to explain everything, but in essence, she proves to him later on that she's pregnant and that it's his child. And he's sitting there like, wow, you're the one who's right here. Which would be a weird thing for a father-in-law to say, except that because of the way he acted, she had to do what she did. And he says, yeah, you're the just one here because I was unjust. That's the story in Jesus' genealogy. Let's go on to the second lady, Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. Theme here, prostitute in Jericho, who saves 2 of the Jewish spies who have come to spy out the land. She saves them because she knows that God is going to give this city into the hand of the Israelites. So she saves them, and so she's spared during this time. Then we come to the next woman, Ruth. She's not Israelite, she's a Moabite. She's the enemy of the Israelites. But through a long story, you can go read the whole book of Ruth. It's amazing because she takes care of her mother-in-law, who is Jewish, and then manages to find a husband who happens to be Rahab's son. Okay? The enemy of Israel happens, and now so not only do we have a woman who was kind of ostracized, pushed to the side, we have a prostitute, and then we have a woman who, in essence, was an enemy of Israel. Those are all three in Jesus' genealogy. Let's look at the next one. And she's actually not even mentioned. And Jesse, the father of David, the king, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. This is what's crazy about this. Bathsheba was the woman that David had an affair with. He knew she was married, still slept with her, got her pregnant, and killed her husband. Can you imagine being this woman? Do you see your life going that way? Where all of a sudden you're married to the man who not only got you pregnant, that child has died, he also murdered your husband, and now you're living in his house. Do you see your life going that way? No, not at all. And I think, we're getting to this later, but I think it's important that she's mentioned this way because we all know whose wife she actually was. She was the wife of Uriah, not David. But it's through her that Solomon is born, and Solomon is the one who brings Israel to its greatest peak. And then there's the last girl. I say girl because she really was. She's a girl, not a woman. Her name was Mary. She was probably a teenager at this point in her life. And she has Jesus. She's this innocent girl who's probably destined for nothing noteworthy in her life. And yet here she is. And it's crazy. If I was God, and I get to choose what family I am born into, like he's not like, I have to be born here. He's like, if I get to choose what family I'm born into, maybe I'd be born into a family that maybe first and foremost had less people who killed people. Like less guys that killed people. Maybe that. And then second, at least at this time, maybe I'd choose a family that had women who had more socially acceptable reputations. Maybe I'd choose a family tree that wasn't so frayed and crazy. Maybe if I was Matthew writing this book, right? Because Matthew is the one writing this. If I was Matthew writing this book, maybe I would, I'm not including everything, maybe I would have left out some of these terrible names like Ahaz and Manasseh who killed their own sons to offer them to idols. Maybe I'd leave them out. Because again, I'm not including everybody. So why not include this guy, Josiah, who was actually a good king, instead of Ahaz or Manasseh? Why not? Why would you include the bad people at the expense of excluding the people with the good reputation? Like, why in the world would you do that? But I think Matthew, he knew something about Jesus. And he knew that Jesus wasn't the type of guy to be ashamed to have his name associated with you. He wasn't ashamed of having his name associated with you. How many of us today would just be like, there's no way I'm part of that family. No way I'm part of all of those people. But Jesus wasn't ashamed of having his name associated with those people. What I find crazy about this is that Jesus had his choice, and he chose the sinners. He chose the liar. He chose the guy with the inferiority complex, the woman who was a prostitute, the man who was a murderer, the prideful, the one who tried really hard but failed, the faithful and the innocent, and the faithless and the guilty. Those are who he chose. It wasn't just the messed up people, it was the good people too, but there was far more messed up people than there were good in his ancestors. He chose that family to be born into. And then Matthew chooses to point out, to not leave out some of these people. And then also, not to just say all of these men, but to include the women whose stories were like this. And we can look back at this today from our perspective as modern people and say, wow, those women are some of the strongest women we could ever know of, right? Imagine having to go through the stuff they went through. But Matthew, in his time, in his society, is including women who, first off, would make Jesus look weak because now he's got women in his genealogy. But then second, women with these types of stories. And Matthew doesn't exclude them. In fact, he doesn't even need to include them, but does anyways. There's a statement being made here. You can read through this genealogy and be like, these are the worst names ever. I mean, I'm never going to name my child Zerubbabel, right? But the reality is that when we read through this, we're seeing a greater truth than we could ever know. And it's this, that God could have chose anybody, and he chose you. He chose you. I mean, look at this. When we look at this story, we can identify with some of these people. And to maybe even drive the point home harder. Let's open up our Bibles to Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, and this is what we see. I can't see it back there. You guys can see it. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to elementary principles of the world, meaning that we are enslaved to ourselves. We're stuck the way we are. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to what? To redeem those under the law so that what? We might receive the adoption as sons. What I find nuts about this is that Jesus didn't only choose his ancestors. Guess what he did next? He chose you. Because Jesus isn't ashamed of you. He's not ashamed to call you his son. He's not ashamed to call you his daughter. In fact, that's what he's most proud of. I think what's amazing about Jesus is while the rest of us would probably look at our families and maybe our friends or people around us and we'd say, man, I don't know if I'd choose them. I don't know if I'd pick that person. Maybe I would change who they are. Jesus chose you directly as you are. You notice that, that these names, again, they're included on purpose. You don't put some of those names in there on accident. You're like, shoot, I left the guy in there who killed his son. No, you put that in there on purpose because Jesus wasn't ashamed of his history. Jesus wasn't ashamed of his family. Jesus wasn't ashamed to call them his own. And when he adopted you as a son and as a daughter, he's making the same exact statement. Because while he was willing to put all of these people in his family, this is what he did for us. And let me say this one more thing. I think that if he had the opportunity to adopt somebody, to adopt children, to choose his children, we don't have that opportunity usually to choose our children, but if he could choose his children, he'd probably have chosen those with obvious potential, those who were probably a little bit more well-behaved, those who were ready to listen and to obey, but he didn't. He chose you the liar, you the unfaithful, you the prideful one, you the one who can never focus for more than 2 seconds, you the hateful who murders people in your heart, you the one who lusts and commits adultery in your heart, you the untrustworthy who promises to get better but keeps on doing the same things over and over again, you maybe the one who never drifted far, you the fearful, you the one who keeps trying so hard but always fails, you the one who doesn't have any obvious gifts or talents, you the one with so many walls up you might as well call yourself a castle, you the one who is afraid of admitting you could ever be wrong. That's what Jesus' family tree tells me. If he chose them and then said, I'm going to adopt all of you as my children, then that's who he chose. He chose me, just as I am. Not any different, just as I am. Matthew chapter 1 says something amazing about Christmas. It says that Jesus isn't ashamed of you. He isn't ashamed that you're in his family. And we could look at our families and maybe we see people we wouldn't choose. Maybe we'd change. But Jesus came to this earth with literally the choice of who he would associate with. And he chose you. He chose me. That's what he did. I think that's amazing. We're going to do something that may seem odd to some of us at this point in time, because we're going to have communion. We're not going to do foot washing, but we're going to have communion available. But it's like, hey, we're not talking about Jesus' death, we're talking about his birth. That doesn't make any sense. But when we look at Jesus' birth, it's the very beginning of a lifetime of him giving himself for us. When he came to this earth, he took on flesh and blood, just like you and I. He wasn't born into some perfect family that never had any issues. He himself wasn't someone who was just like Superman, where all the bullets bounce, where all the temptation bounces off of him. He was someone who could feel, who could empathize, who could understand where you are today. He was born into flesh and blood. This is what blows my mind. My wife and I were down to see some friends of ours who just had a baby. We don't have a baby. All of our friends who are about the same age don't have kids yet, or are pregnant, don't have the child yet, except for this one couple. And so we were visiting with them, and it was kind of my first experience of someone my age that had a child with him. And so we got to hold him. His name was Noel. So cute. Big, chubby cheeks. His chin's like this small because of his cheeks are out like here. Just adorable kid. And we're sitting there, and I'm holding him, and just kind of shocked because for all of you parents out there, you know that a child, especially a young child, can't hold their head up. You know, you have to support their head. And I'm sitting there realizing, like, you mean Jesus did this? Like, he took on flesh and blood, not just as an adult, but as a child who literally had to have his mom support his head. This helpless little kid. But then not only that, like, he was a teenager, so he knows what adolescence is like, all of the horribleness of adolescence. And you mean that he knows what it's like to be an adult and to maybe lose people he loved, to experience temptation, to experience the ways of this world that are just awful and horrible. Some of us are just sitting here today like, this world is heavy. And he experienced that too. But that the tragic end of Jesus' life is that we broke his body and we spilt his blood. We did it because we rebelled against him, and he comes in the most loving way possible to show himself who he is once and for all. And we look at him and we take him to a cross and we nail his arms into a tree and we put him up on display and we mock him and we say all these things because he was too loving for us, I guess. I mean, it's mind-blowing to me. We broke his body and we spilt his blood. The one who came in flesh and blood so that I could know what he was like. We take communion today, though, not today specifically, not as a remembrance of this defeat, this seeming defeat at the cross. We take this as a symbol of victory because Jesus did not stay in the grave. He rose from the dead, victorious over all death and destruction, sin, and anything that would come with it. He rose victorious over all of it so that you and I could have a second chance. And when he goes to heaven, he says, I'm going to send my spirit into your hearts to transform you from the inside so you no longer would be the type of people that would kill me, but you'd be the type of people that would be like me. And so when we take communion today, we're doing it as an identification, as being part of God's family. That his spirit might be in our hearts, transforming us from the inside, because he's given his life for us, and so we get to take what he's given us and be nourished by it. And I believe this about us today, that every single person in here, and I wouldn't skip over a single person, every one of you is chosen to be part of God's family. That he would not have skipped over you, that his death on the cross wasn't, hey, let me tell you who I died for except for this person. Let me tell you who I love except for this person who just has rejected me too many times. He never did that, never will. And in fact, when you look at his genealogy, you know for a fact that he would include you in his family tree. He wants to see you at family reunions. He wants to be with you. He wants to laugh with you. He wants to go fishing with little Jesse, who didn't get to fish. He wants to do that because he loves you. So we take communion today as a symbol of victory, a symbol of knowing that we're part of a family and not rejected, no matter who we are. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to have, if you want to, you don't have to participate, but if you would like to, and let me say this too, if you don't want to participate, no one's going to judge you. That's not what this is about. But if you want to participate, we're going to have you stand, and then you can go back to the tables in the back, take the emblems, the juice and the bread, and then come back and sit down. I'm not going to facilitate. Nobody's going to facilitate. This is a moment between you and God on your own. After a little while, the band will ask everybody to stand and we'll sing our last song. But I want you to remember this as you pray. You are chosen, that the genealogy of Jesus Christ includes you. And it always will. No matter what you do, no matter how far you go, you may never want to be in heaven, but you'll still be there in his family tree because he loves you. Why don't we all stand together and we're going to pray. Lord, I want to thank you so much that you are a good Father, that you are a God who would not reject any of us, that you came as a child, you came as this helpless child, you died a sinner's death, and yet you rose victorious over all of it. And today, Lord, we have confidence knowing that we can come before you because you love us. There is nothing in this world that can separate us from your love. Not even our own choices, not our own sin. None of that could separate us from your love unless we allow it to, unless we put it in front of it and say, we don't want to be around you. So Lord, let this moment be a time where our walls come down, when we identify ourselves with you, knowing that we are your sons and daughters, cherished and loved forever, that it will never stop, and that no matter the choices that we make today, tomorrow, the day after, that you still include us with pride in your family tree saying, that's my son, and that's my daughter, and I'd love to tell you about them. That's how you view us. So Lord, let us identify with that today. Thank you so much in your name. Feel free to go to the back and get the emblems, and we'll sing a little while.
Could we stand as we sing this song again? Children, weep no more. Hope is on the horizon. Weary world, behold your promised Messiah. Angels, let your song begin. Here Love is broken the silence. Come, let us adore. The Savior is with us. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. Christ is born in Bethlehem. Here comes heaven. Here comes heaven. Now behold His glory, glory in the highest. All the earth rejoice, for Christ is born. Now behold His glory, glory in the highest. All the earth rejoice, for Christ is born. Let's sing that together one more time. Now behold His glory, glory in the highest. All the earth rejoice, for Christ is born. Over all who mourn, breaks the dawn of salvation. Darkness reigns no more, for Jesus is greater. He is greater. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. All creation worship Him. Here comes heaven. Let's sing this together. Angels, let your song begin. Here comes heaven. Christ is born in Bethlehem. Here comes heaven. Here comes heaven.
Lord, you came to this little town called Bethlehem, and you've changed the world. And we're here today because of that moment where you chose to come and be like us, to take on flesh and blood, to not skip over our experience, but to experience it so that we can know that you empathize with us, that you know what it's like to go through what we're going through. And Lord, I thank you that you're the type of God that would include me, every single person in this room, in your family tree. And not a single one of us is excluded because of our actions, because of our thoughts, because of our failures, because of our weaknesses. And I know there's some of us, Lord, that you wish would come back. There's some of us that you want to bring closer. But we're still not excluded from your love, no matter what we do. Let us leave this place with that confidence, knowing that your body was broken, your blood was spilled, as the greatest act of love imaginable. And we leave this place not with a defeated God, not with a God who's lying dead in a grave, but with a God who is alive and who is sending His Spirit into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. We promise that, Lord, in Galatians. That's what you're doing for us. And so, Lord, let us see you as our Father, as our Lord, as our Savior, so that when we leave this place, we're not leaving only in our own strength, but in yours. For we are your children, your heirs. You want to give us everything that you have. Let us be open and honest and willing to receive what you want to give. Thanks for including us in your family. Amen. Have a happy Sabbath. If you're planning on giving blood, you can stick around, but we'll see you next